Today on the LIVEcast, we will be talking about Douglas Murray's recent appearance as part of our Reset series, and we'll also be looking at the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett as Supreme Court Justice. Hello everyone, welcome to the LIVEcast. My name is Paul Feasy, and as always, I'm joined by Glen Scrivener.
Hello, it's Glen Scrivener here, with the P-Fizzle.
With the P-Fizzle, that's it, Paul Fizzy. Yep, time to get busy with the fizzy again, people. Here we go. Yes.
Which is one of my favourite comments from last week's video. We've got Mundy Carroll. Hello, Mundy. She said, like your shirt, Paul Fizzy.
Yep, I believe I was wearing a Metallica t-shirt last week.
Oh, really?
Yes, I believe that was the... That's what she's referring to there, I imagine. So.
Your shirts quite often get a few comments. I don't think I get quite my due, fair share of comments.
No.
My sartorial elegance has escaped most people.
It's a different, different thing, isn't it?
We were discussing, I think one of my favourite shirts of yours is the one from Very British Problems.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. The one that says... what we say is, I'll let you get on. Yes. And the translation, that really just means go away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very British Problems, if people don't know Very British Problems, if you're a missionary to the UK, and in one sense I am, I think this is essential reading for contextualising yourself among this strange breed of human called the British.
Yep.
Because the passive-aggressive just say what you mean, English people. But,
it's like every time I read Very British Problems, it is just like I'm looking at my own life, just being reflected straight back at me. All the things I say. Yeah. So, I'll let you get on definitely means go away, please. Yeah. And, when people say... You come to you with an idea and you go, oh, great, I'll think about it. No, I won't think about it. That's what it means.
You really must come over for dinner. Forget it.
He's a bit of a character. Right. He's the worst human being I've ever met. All
that, And you think it's just cute understatement, and everyone else is just baffled and offended. So Very British Problems. It is essential reading for those who want to contextualise in the British context.
Definitely.
But Mundy Carroll, on last week's video, we did a video about QAnon and more generally about conspiracy theories. Basically, we did it about QAnon because that was in the news, and what we try to do is respond to the news and then see if we can bring a theological perspective to it. Mundy had that comment, I like your shirt, Paul Fizzy, but one who is called Dominus Illuminatio Mea. Benefits of a classical education, people. Latin for the Lord my guiding light. Anyway, that person commented, fun fact, only 6% of both Republicans and Democrats say they believe in QAnon. Which is actually something we were going to get onto last week.
We did talk about it, didn't we? Like between ourselves, but I don't think it made it to air. So
the whole idea that actually I saw a poll that said Democrats are more likely to have heard of QAnon, and they're more likely to have heard of it as a right-wing conspiracy that all the bad right-wing people over there, they believe this QAnon stuff. And let me tell you about the vampiric blood-sucking tendencies of QAnon. But actually, more people...
When you say that to the right-wing people, they go, Q what now?
Yeah, well, exactly. Exactly.
That's what they would say, Glenn. That's what they would say.
It's plausible deniability. That's what it is. It is important... that part of the story about why we're hearing about QAnon is not so much that QAnon is so prevalent. Part of the reason we're hearing about the story is we're being told to fear a certain segment of the population, and there is a very broad brush that's being used. And certainly in the Guardian/Observer article that we read from last week, it sort of said there's QAnon, and it's kind of this pro-Trump thing, and it's anti the deep state, and there are elements of it that are anti-Semitic and Nazi and blah, 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 which is incredibly broad brushstroke. And I think, people quite rightly have said, look, just because I can tick one or two of these boxes does not lump me in with the entire, an entire movement that might be described by some as anti-Semitic or that sort of thing. And it is interesting that people on the left tend to have heard of QAnon more than people on the right. And does that mean that the media is making us fear QAnon more than, there is such a movement. And the poll that was linked to by Dominus Illuminatio Mea, I got it right.
Nailed it this time.
Yep. There was an Emerson poll that was run regarding QAnon, a far-right conspiracy theory detailing a supposed secret plot by alleged deep state against US President Donald Trump and his supporters. 5% of voters believe in QAnon, while 22% do not. 73% were unsure or had not heard of QAnon. 6% of both Democrats and Republicans say that they are believers in QAnon, as compared to 2% of independents. So interesting to get a few stats on that. And then there was a third comment that we wanted to talk about. Do you want to do Platinum Bubble or me?
You go on, you kick it in. And
okay,
well,
Platinum Bubble commented, this is so sad, guys. You're great at theology and apologetics, but you've shifted from your lane without due diligence. You make all sorts of accusations, but in doing so reveal that you haven't researched what our friendly back channel is saying at all. Did you just read a few critical articles and think you understood it all? The back channel is not anti-Semitic or anti-immigrant or Gnostic or far-right or whatever else you've accused them of. Why didn't you speak to someone who really knows about it before you pass judgment? This video won't age well. It's a bit like analyzing the idea of the ark by only talking to the people mocking Noah. How did they feel when those first drops of rain touched their faces and didn't ease up? From a supporter. So thank you, Platinum Bubble. But I think one of the things we wanted to do in raising this issue is not to point a finger at QAnon simply. We mentioned as well Darren Brown and Stephen Fry as people who are very much on the left, and very much gullible in certain senses to a certain telling of the story. And so I think the reason why we kind of brought up QAnon is not QAnon in particular, but it is this interesting interplay between being gullible and being skeptical. Because I think all of us are gullible, and all of us are skeptical. It just depends what it is that we swallow and what it is that we strain out like a gnat. So we've often spoken before about the different plausibility of different conspiracy theories, like did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself or not? And it sounds a lot less crazy to say Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself than it does to say that the Earth is flat. For instance, let's pick two poles on the believability scale.
I don't think the people who think the Earth is flat would appreciate poles, would they? No. Just saying. Hello.
That is very true. That is very true. It is a global movement, though.
Hey.
The whole flat Earth.
Followers all around the globe.
That's it. But I mean, to entertain the thought that Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself is to entertain the thought that he was killed, which is to entertain the thought that there was some level of collusion with at least one other security guard, which is improbable unless there was some greater collusion with other powers that be. Is all of that plausible? Yeah, it is plausible. And therefore, what is the solution to that? Well, I don't think to be skeptical of the story of Jeffrey Epstein having killed himself, I don't think that then commits you to being, to swallowing whole what the back channel says, or what Q-drops say, what QAnon says. And just because because we can be rightly skeptical of certain presentations to us about who's really in charge of the world and all that kind of stuff, doesn't mean we then have to go to this, like the Bible says, put not your trust in princes, which is like telling us to be very skeptical, even of our rulers. We are to obey our rulers and pay our taxes and honor them and pray for them. Sure. We're also not to put our trust in them. So don't trust them.
Yeah.
Pay your taxes, don't trust them.
Yeah.
So we're to be skeptical of them, but that doesn't mean that therefore the ones who are really pulling the strings in this world are meeting in a secret underground lair and it's run by a couple of billionaires.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't have any issue. I mean, you use the Epstein case as an example, and obviously I think we've talked about the Prince Andrew stuff as well, with him being kind of on the edges of that and people kind of going, is he involved with something? And it's all a bit kind of fishy. I can certainly look at that and say, hey, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some kind of, ring of people behind the scenes that may involve, politicians or people, whoever, who could be involved in.
I feel like the word allegedly should be
allegedly. I'm saying,
no,
in a sense, you can completely imagine that could be true, that there are people who've got power who are misusing their power for their own ends and, in whatever way that looks like. Yeah. So I'm not saying, no, it's all utter nonsense.
Yeah.
But obviously, like you say, but just by... That doesn't necessarily mean I want to jump into the camp that says, therefore, as well, clearly Donald Trump is part of, this messiah figure in all this and so on. Committing, saying you're open to thinking about one thing doesn't mean I'm jumping into bed with all the other things. So
yeah. And interestingly, that within QAnon, that the idea of sex trafficking and sex abuse and pedophilia and that sort of thing is quite strong there. And when someone like Jeffrey Epstein is arrested, and then when he's dead, it does make you think, okay, we know to the great shame of the church that there can be sex abuse scandals that get covered up. We know the sorts of dynamics at play that allow that evil to continue and to not be addressed, and for light not to be shone on those places. And we know in a secular space as well, the rape gangs in the United Kingdom are cases in which terrible abuse has happened and been covered up, and we haven't heard about it to the degree that we really ought to have heard about it.
Yeah.
But you don't need to conclude that the Rotherham sex abuse, scandals, or Oxford, or any number of these places where the rape gangs did their evil. You don't need to assume that is because of one or two billionaires who are meeting together and doing X, Y, or Z. You can look at this interplay between fundamentalist Islamic beliefs and some socioeconomic conditions in the United Kingdom in the 21st century, and there are evil men, and there are some shame-based communities that are not wanting to confront the evil within them, and there's a culture of political correctness that incentivizes turning a blind eye to certain things that might be seen as racist, and you put all those elements into a pot and you stir them, and you get this wickedness that has happened. But I think, in a sense, it's far too simplistic to say there was one person pulling the strings.
Yeah.
Or there's a secret cabal pulling the strings.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those things these things do clearly go on, don't they? Behind the scenes, there is stuff going on that's very dark and stuff. I suppose my thing is I'm less convinced that it's all joined together. It's all joined up with this single thread somewhere. I think it's just wicked people doing wicked things, independent of each other. But equally, we also know that things that sound kind of rather outlandish can also end up being true. Yeah. So, I mean, back in the kind of 50s and 60s, people would have said, hey, look, apparently the Americans have got all these Nazis. The American government have taken the Nazis out of Germany, and they're getting them to work at NASA to beat the Russians to get to the moon and get into space. And that sounds just crazy, doesn't it? Right. It's all true.
Right.
Loads of Nazis were taken out of Germany by the Americans, given new identities, and they built the V rocket? Can't remember what it was called.
V5? No, I don't know.
I can't remember exactly which one. But so and they were like, well, let's get these guys and let's get them to build stuff to get us into space, and that's exactly what happened. So it sounds crazy, but it's a reality. So I mean,
everything's a crazy conspiracy theory until it's proven.
Absolutely.
And then it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that is absolutely true, and don't put your trust in princes and all that, but therefore do put your trust in the one who really is ruling the world. And this is where we wanted to get to, in the last video, that, there is a secret cabal ruling the world. The Father has committed all things to the Son. But he says to the world, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, take my yoke upon me. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. And so what he's really doing is giving us the secret wisdom in order to navigate a scary world in which there is sex abuse and cover-ups and power plays and bullying and horrendous, forces, and you can feel cut adrift. And Jesus is like, no, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So be united to Jesus. And to wear the yoke of Jesus, I think, is really to go the way of Jesus and to turn the other cheek to evil and to forgive evildoers and to love your neighbor as yourself. This is the secret wisdom that will actually overturn the world. What's actually going to overturn the world? It's not being in on the secret knowledge about, secret cabals in charge of the world. It's the church. It's Christians living out the love of Jesus day by day. We really are in touch with the secret wisdom that runs the world. And it would be thrilling to think, oh, I know who is really in charge of this world. And I know that they're really pulling the strings. And wouldn't it be even more amazing to think, and I've got a hotline to that person, right? Mm-hmm. But the thrilling thing is, as Christians, we do know who's in charge of the world. We have a hotline to him. He's given us our marching orders, and this really is the power to overturn the world. So if we libeled QAnon people or slandered them or spoke ill or attributed to them views that they don't have, if we've attributed views to them that we don't have, then hands up, that's wrong. We shouldn't do that. And we're very aware that certain people can weaponize the conspiracy theory label in order to silence dissent. I mean, one example is vaccines. So, is it okay to be at least somewhat skeptical of vaccines that will be rushed through in time for November?
Yeah, sure.
Is it okay to be skeptical about the how good these vaccines will be? Is it okay to raise moral questions about how have these been developed, and have they been developed from the use of aborted human tissue, babies, right? Is it okay to raise that question? Is it okay to raise the questions about the safety of such a vaccine? I think it should be. Does that make you an anti-vaxxer with all the connotations?
All the stuff that goes with it? Well, no.
But that can be weaponized.
It shouldn't, but yeah, we see it, that can be the case, can't it?
Yeah. You don't want to be an anti-vaxxer, do you? Like, oh, sorry, no. Okay, I'll just give me the injection, quick. I'll do it myself. So I can see how that stuff can get weaponized, but yeah, I really hope that it gets people coming back to Jesus and living out his the real counterculture is not to join this movement or that movement, but to join the church. That's the real counterculture, and that really is in charge of the world. That's where we were trying to get to with all of that stuff. But we also released another video this week, and that was the start of our Reset series, where we're interviewing a whole bunch of different people, some of them Christians, some of them not, cultural commentators, biblical commentators, and going back to Genesis, right back to the beginning, to that origin story, and seeing if that ancient text can still speak today. And we're going to watch a little clip of Douglas Murray, and then we'll talk about that conversation, which you can get in the link below. But let's have a look at the clip.
But what you touch on is very, very interesting. As you know, I'm all over this subject because I'm interested in the things that the age waves through without question. And I say in the gay chapter of Madness of Crowds, while starting off with this group who made this film about so-called gay conversion therapy, that I'm much more willing to listen to their arguments than many people, particularly most gay people, partly because I'm just curious about curious arguments, and partly because, as I say there, I think there are questions that were left behind. And that's consistent in all of the issues I address in The Manners of Crowds. It's consistent in the women's chapter. So what are the questions that feminism left behind as too difficult to address? The obvious one I say, like Camille Paglia, the obvious one is motherhood. Feminism jumped along on a whole range of things to do with, equal representation on boards and so on, and really never worked out what to do about motherhood. And as I say in The Manners of Crowds, that's a biggie. That's a biggie to jump over. And in the gay chapter, yes, I say something along the lines of what you just said, which is we have a set of odd ideas about this. One is that the gay is a one-way street, which it may be, and there's a lot of evidence to demonstrate that it is, that there is, however, considerable diversity, and the largest form of diversity in that is between men and women. This is a conversation I've had in the past, I think people can find on YouTube, with Brett Weinstein, the biologist, about why it may be that women are more sexually fluid in this way than men. I mean, the shorthand example I give is you can quite often find somebody who's a lesbian who's had bad examples with men, and that may not be the only reason she's become a lesbian, but it's quite a strong one that she seeks to be with another woman. You never meet a man who's had bad experiences with women and as a result becomes gay. I mean, who wouldn't have been had they not met the wrong woman, sort of thing. Now, all this is incredibly dangerous and contested terrain, perhaps. But I say, look, why have we said it's so straightforwardly a one-way street? Are we absolutely sure about the nature of how sexuality is formed? And the answer is no, we're not really. I think the evidence increasingly points to the fact that it is biological, or at least determined from the womb, from very, very early age. But there are also possibly some societal factors that might be at play. And I don't see why we shouldn't be able to discuss them, other than that they tread on some what have become sacred values. And I'd add one other thing. Of course, the obvious reason is this fear that if you do address them, then you'll go back to the horrible times that have existed in the past. And in some places exist still, where young gay people are effectively sort of tortured by alleged professionals in order to become something they just cannot become. But yes, the example you give also exists in the trans one. And I've written about this a lot, because the era now says if you're, a young, say, effeminate boy, likelihood is you're really a girl and should be given medical help to become a girl, and vice versa, a tomboyish girl is really a boy. And that's, of course, not only against a lot of issues to do with women's rights, but a lot of things to do with gay rights. And that is very offensive to a lot of gay people. And so, but the point of saying all this is to say this whole thing's a great big blooming mess. It's very messy terrain. And I think that it's unwise. It's wise to try to be as kindly to people as possible and to listen to their concerns. It seems unwise to me to dig in and embed narratives that have not actually been proven.
Right. And
I worry about any shutting down that's total like that. So, as you say, the conversion therapy example is tricky, because you may make it illegal for somebody to suggest that somebody might be happier being straight. And as I say, like in the case of your friend, that's more common among women. But at the same time as you make that illegal, you make it illegal not to approve of a child being in the wrong sex and therefore medically transitioning at a later stage. That seems to me to be a very dementing set of things to have going on at the same time. So I'm just interested in opening that up. I think we need to know a lot more until we're as certain as we're currently pretending to be about these issues.
Great. So that went out on Friday, wasn't it?
That's right.
I think so. You'd obviously had a chat with Douglas kind of a week or two back. Tell us a bit about it. Obviously we saw a little bit there, but how did it go? Was it a good conversation?
I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And as soon as I knew I wanted to do Reset, Douglas was one of the first people I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get? And very generously, he gave his time to us. And, he is doing wall-to-wall media. He's a professional writer. His book, his paperback is out. And so...
An updated version, isn't it? I think it's got expanded from the hardback or something.
Right, because the hardback came out in 2019, and then a few things have happened in 2020.
Apparently so. Yeah, a few things.
I don't know if you've noticed, but yeah, so he wrote an expanded sort of afterword to that. But yeah, so I mean, he's in demand all over the place. He was doing Joe Rogan, after he spoke to me. So it's just great to be able to get him. And I think, interestingly, his personal journey with faith is that, he was a believing Christian right into his 20s, and significantly into his 20s. It wasn't just like he went away to university and lost his childhood faith, but he confirmed in the Anglican Church and a proper Christian who then walked away from it and then kind of identified as atheist. And now he says, well, I much prefer the old gods to the new gods.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I think why he's a good cultural analyst is because he personally has taken the journey that the West has taken.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see.
Walking away from that inheritance and then going, wait a minute, what's here?
Where does this leave us?
Because I thought we were walking into rationality, and it seems we're walking into the madness of crowds.
Surely by leaving behind religion, actually everything's going to be better and so on. But actually, particularly in the last 5 or 10 years, you see this acceleration where people seem more divided and segregated and at each other's throats than we have been for a while.
Yeah, totally. And less rational than ever.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, if I went back to kind of when I was at university, kind of finished in 2008. Everything was about, particularly in the Christian realm, in terms of, it was all about coming up against the new atheists. It was all about science and rationality and, you can't prove Christianity and science is the real thing that has empirical evidence and all this stuff. And now nobody is talking about that. Like, where's new atheism now?
Right.
Like, that's gone because everybody now is not talking remotely about let's look at the facts. It's just, hey, let's listen to how people feel, people's lived experience and stuff like that. So, and it's incredible how quickly that's happened, really.
Yeah. He begins the book with a quote from G.K. Chesterton, and the mark of the modern age is not simply that it is it's not that it is not dogmatic, it's that it is dogmatic without knowing it. And the way that Douglas speaks about the new gods, he's just very clear that there are theological claims being made, but they're theological claims that are kind of divorced. They've emerged from Christianity, but they've been cut loose from Christianity. And so equality, diversity, inclusion are remarkably Christian ideas, and we talk about that in the interview, but untethered now.
Yeah. I'm slightly diverting off the topic here a little bit, but given that that's the change there's been in the last kind of 10, 12 years or whatever, how do you think that affects like the way we do evangelism? Because I'm just thinking back to when I was at uni and like kind of the classic Christian Union Mission Week with your lunch bars, and there's all these questions about like rationality and science and stuff. And it strikes me that the couple we've been on in the last few years, they haven't hugely changed. And I wonder whether when Christian unions, or even churches, but I guess Christian unions are a good example, put on these events like that, are they really asking the questions that people are asking, or have people moved past it? I'll just put you on the spot there, so off you go.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I even question whether those lunch bars 10 years ago actually did the trick back in the day either.
Right, okay, yeah.
Because even though Richard Dawkins was grabbing all the headlines, I don't think he was where most of your friends were. And
you said a few times, haven't you, that like you've sat in those sessions when someone else has been speaking and they've, someone has got up in the Q&A afterwards who was maybe a kind of new atheist type person who would then bash the person at the front with something, and you'd ask the person next to you who was a guest, well, what do you think about what that guy said? And they said, I don't care about what that guy said. I'm here because my granddad died the other week and I just want to know what's going on. And
Right.
And even then, you think people all the non-Christians are there to kind of be like, well, here I am with my rational atheist mindset to evaluate this evidence and debunk it in whatever way. But to be honest, that wasn't where people were at.
No, his granddad had died, and granddads always die. And that's what makes people really ask the big questions. And the motto that I always kind of use is almost my mantra since that day when I sat next to that guy, is that the guy with the microphone does not speak for the room. Because there was an angry atheist in that room. He was dominating the Q&A, and he had the microphone, and we all had to listen to him for a bit. But as soon as the microphone was off, we turned to one another and we talked about the stuff that was really on our hearts. And it wasn't what the guy with the microphone was speaking about. And for a limited time, Richard Dawkins had the microphone. And I think Christians started to believe that he did speak for the room. And we forgot to talk to our neighbor about their grandfather and about mortality and about the sufferings of this vale of tears. And instead...
And Murray, actually, not in the interview, but in the top 10 quotes, the video that we put out, he has that thing where he looks like he's at, is it Oxford or Cambridge?
Cambridge,
yeah. And he says how atheism misses things, and it doesn't have anything to say to suffering and tragedy and or forgiveness and loss and all those things.
Right.
And he looks a bit younger then as well, so I'm guessing that was...
Yeah,
probably back in those kind of days.
That was back in the height of the new atheism. I think he was debating against Richard Dawkins.
I think he references, that he's there
in that whole thing, and that has never changed. The new atheism can come and go, but the issue of our mortality and human tragedy and suffering and our need for forgiveness and to find repentance and peace and reconciliation, all those things are absolutely immutable, and they're far closer to each person's human experience than the common tropes of the new atheists. So I think we were suckered into, and I was suckered into, engaging with the new atheism on its own terms, as though the guy with the microphone spoke for the room, and then all I wanted to do was grab a microphone and say, oh, you think that, but I think this, and
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the guy next to me, like, he is unedified by any of that. Like, even if the Christian wins that argument.
Yeah, he doesn't care about, like, oh, well, who made God? And all this great that question
the
again.
Flying spaghetti monster and all of that. Yeah, so I think we are slowly learning to do Plato's old sort of triad of goodness, beauty, truth. We've been sort of talking about the truth thing in abstraction from goodness and beauty quite often. And I think talking about the good life and talking about beauty, art, music, story, wisdom for life, I think those are categories that are far more fruitful in evangelism. We're trying to figure out how to do that. But, again and again, I think, why do I constantly reference Jordan Peterson? Ding! Jordan Peterson! Is because he's able to pack out theaters where he just talks about the book of Genesis, because he's applying it to life, and he's saying here is a text that he just believes it's a human text written to humans to humanize them. But I think the Bible is not less than that, and we miss out on so much when we just treat the Bible like this divine text that's given to the super spiritual to fine-tune their spiritual lives. And Peterson gets a hearing because he talks about here's how to live. Here's how to be free. Here's how to flourish. Here is wisdom. And I think far more that's useful these days.
Yeah, and if the non-Christian can take Genesis and do that with it, what could the Christian do?
What could the Christian do? I know.
It's almost like we could... Someone should make a series about that,
I know. Going back to the beginning. So Douglas Murray is kicking off this series, and we're talking to Catherine Birbal-Singh, and she'll be out on Friday, and then Tom Holland, and a whole bunch of people, lots of professors. I think we've got like 7 professors in the lineup, and so the series has begun on Friday, and it began with Douglas Murray, and then this Friday we've got Catherine Birbal-Singh, we've got Tom Holland coming up, we've got Professor John Lennox, Professor Rupert Sheldrake, Professor Miroslav Volf. We've got about 7 professors, I think.
Very good.
And Rebecca McLaughlin, Wendy Alsop, a whole bunch of different people. And we're really just wanting to see if the ancient text of Genesis can still speak today. And if you're not subscribed, do subscribe to us on YouTube, and you'll get them in your feed. But I did find it interesting talking to Douglas Murray about the issue of gay conversion therapy. So we just saw that in the clip, and I actually gave him the experience of Rachel Gilson, who is one of the others who we're going to be interviewing in this series. So here is a girl who comes to Christ. She had always only really been attracted to women in the past, but she's become a Christian, and now there's this guy on the scene, Andrew, and he likes her, and she starts to feel, is God calling me towards a relationship and more with Andrew? And in a previous interview with Rachel, she kind of talks about her desire for Andrew being a little bit like a candle kind of fluttering in the wind, and it's just a little, but she could protect the candle and nurture that flame and bring it into something more of a roaring flame, and that's her description of fostering heterosexual feelings for another man, but that could be criminalized if you say that that's gay conversion therapy, or if anyone helped her to do that.
Yeah. So like the example you give, if she'd said, "Would you pray for me to foster that, for it to grow?"
Yeah.
Someone could construe that and say, this is gay conversion therapy. This is terrible.
Right.
This is wrong.
And at the same time, we're running this other program that says, if Rachel prayed to become Andrew, this should be celebrated.
Yeah.
How do you run both those programs together? And I said to Douglas, look, it seems pretty obvious, doesn't it, that there's a fixity to gender and much more of a fluidity to sexuality, and he seemed to say yes, which is an interesting admission, I think, and I think it does go towards the view that okay, if we're cautious about the trans issue, that has implications for the gay issue. If we're cautious about saying, I'm not so sure that a Rachel can become an Andrew, because gender is not sort of interchangeable in that way, then what about when the Christian says, well, let's be cautious in marriage of saying that we can just swap one gender for another and marriage remains the same? Douglas Murray very famously, wrote a piece in The Spectator about gay marriage is a conservative issue because it's bringing the goodness of marriage to a wider number of people. And David Cameron quoted basically from Douglas Murray's article at the Tory Party conference and said, I'm not pro-gay marriage in spite of being a conservative. I'm pro-gay marriage because I'm a conservative. So Douglas Murray's been right at the heart of that. But I do therefore see there's an argument, isn't there? Is there an argument for saying, because we're cautious about saying gender is interchangeable, because we think it's far more fixed than that, then surely a male-male relationship is a different kind of a thing to a male-female relationship. Doesn't mean you have to persecute male-male relationships, doesn't mean you have to diminish them or make them less in the eyes of the law necessarily, but it does mean, perhaps in the eyes of God, there is something different about male-male, male-female. Can that be said?
No. Don't be silly. Of course you can't say those kind of things.
But I find it interesting that I think on Douglas's own logic, you can say stuff like that.
He from listening to the whole interview, one of his big things does seem to be, I just wish we could have these conversations about things.
Yes.
At least to talk about them. And he says, but people are scared of having X and Y conversation because of the potential of what could come from it. But he's very much like, well, we're all grown-ups, can't we have these conversations? So
we all should be. We all should be. Yeah. And I think that would be like the only other thing I would have loved to have gotten into with Douglas was a question of time scale. So he says in the book a number of times that the madness we've gotten ourselves into, it would be a little bit like a train that pulls into the station just nicely, it just comes to rest. And he's kind of talking about sort of the equality train. And we all...
love train.
Let's get on the love train. And, surely we've gotten to the stage where on all these issues of gay and race and trans and whatever the other word, women and, relationships between the sexes, we've basically come to a position of equality, haven't we? Now can we just get on with the other stuff of let's build underwater cities and get to Mars and, let's cure cancer and not debate about pronouns the whole time. And so I think he looks wistfully back to the 1990s as a time when things were just equal and we just got on with stuff. But in his telling of history, he says, the train has pulled into the station, and just when you thought it had come to rest, it somehow gets a new wind of speed, crashes through the barrier, up onto the platform, smashing through people, and it's chaos. And I just question that telling of history. It seems unlikely that is the case. If you were an investigator looking at the train crash, I don't think the first thing you would conclude is, I bet this train pulls safely into the
Probably
station.
stopped there first.
Probably stopped there first. And then an almighty
accelerated
injection of
hugely
power.
up onto the platform.
I think what you would conclude is this train was probably out of control for quite some time. It had probably lost its brakes way back there. It's not where it should be, and it probably has been heading towards this trajectory for some time now.
So, he talks, doesn't he? So is that an argument for, I think, what he mentioned to do with kind of the overcompensation, overreaching type thing? Where you've been accelerating towards these equalities and things to try and get rid of all this bad stuff from the past. But in the process of trying to, you've actually overshot the station and flown past.
Yes.
But we would, I suppose, we would debate whether we ever really stopped in the station or just, it just always was off.
And maybe we're crashed because way back there, we'd left the tracks and we didn't put the brakes on way back there. And, Douglas and I are the same age. I think we both look back to the 1990s as these sort of halcyon days. It wasn't everything great. But, what if actually we were both in the train carriage, peering out the window. We both quite liked the countryside, but we were off the tracks and there were no brakes and things were bad even then. Or at least things were off kilter. And, we all know it with train tracks. If you're just off by one degree here, down the line, you're off by quite some distance. And I don't think it's drawing a long bow to say that some of these problems are back to the 50s and 60s, especially around the sexual revolution, that actually, naturally speaking, civilization is built on father, mother, child, as G.K. Chesterton spoke of father, mother, child as this triangle, and it's the strongest structure. Everyone knows in engineering that the strongest structure is a triangle, and if you try to break the triangle will break you. G.K. Chesterton said father, mother, child is the strongest social unit. You try to break that apart, it'll break you, right? And therefore, if father, mother, child is this unit that must be held together, then we used to hold together sex and marriage, and sex and pregnancy and children in the family unit. And this was this strong, building block of society. But what happens, when you have the pill and contraception and the sexual revolution and then easy, no-fault divorce, and what you have is suddenly sex gets taken out of the context of marriage gets taken out of the context of lifelong commitment. Sex and pregnancy are kind of severed apart because of contraception. Pregnancy and children are severed apart because of abortion. And the children are then growing up in families that do not have the security of the mother-father thing. Everything's kind of been blown apart in the name of liberation and freedom. I wonder if that's where we came off the rails. And many of us enjoyed life in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But I wonder whether the end point is exactly what we've seen. And the problem did not come with the invention of social media. The problem did not come with the 2008 financial crash. The problem goes back a little bit longer. That's what I think. But I think Douglas is kind of very open to hearing that, because he's just like, the complementarity of the sexes. We want to be able to talk about that. Can we please have a conversation about that? So I think Douglas is very open to all this kind of stuff.
He had no problem in your discussion with the idea that there are differences between men and women, and people will react differently based on their gender to things. And he's obviously broad brushstrokes, but in general, there are differences. Which I think goes back to the G.K. Chesterton mother, father, child. You just can't get away from mother, father, child, actually. And to the degree that we're trying to say, men can be women and women can be men, and we all know that we have a nature, and nature bites back. If you don't accept and conform yourself to nature, nature bites back, and therefore, we need to accept the maleness of male and the femaleness of female. But as soon as you do that, that means that a male-male relationship is a different kind of thing to a male-female relationship, is a different kind of thing to a female-female kind of a relationship. And I quite understand why members of the gay community get very twitchy at that point, because that can start to sound homophobic. I can totally see that can lead to the utter degradation of the humanity of male-male relationships, female-female relationships. But it doesn't have to.
Doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Is there a way of saying there just is a difference between a male-female relationship, and therefore, what happened in 2014 in the UK was not an expansion of marriage, but a changing of the meaning of marriage. Right. So that I would say Douglas Murray in that 2013 article is wrong, and I'd be really interested to know if he'd rewrite or rethink what he thought back in 2013. But his argument was there's this thing called marriage, and all we're doing is expanding its definition to include more people.
Marriage is a good thing. If we expand it to include more people, that's good for society and so on.
And by the way, I agree with so much of what he wrote back in 2013, because he sort of said, look, if anything has ruined marriage, it's been heterosexuals, right?
Sure.
Easy divorce, infidelity, porn, there are any number of ways that, I mean, straight people have ruined marriage, like far more than gay people have. Like, I totally agree with that. And I don't think that the introduction of gay marriage is the thin end of the wedge, and that's why we are where we are. What I do think is that gay marriage and the trans ideologue both rely on this former kind of sexual liberation theory that says the genders are far more fluid and interchangeable. And therefore, to have this thing called marriage and to change the sex of one of the spouses is not to maintain it as marriage, but it is to redefine it. Just as to change the gender of a trans person is not to leave the person unaffected, so to change the gender of a spouse is not to leave the marriage unaffected. It's to make it something different. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't have equal rights for civil partnerships, right? That doesn't mean that. But I think it would mean that you say, okay, marriage is a male-female thing. Just irreducibly, it's just the way that it is. And everyone is then discriminated against, right? Because as we said when we did our cuties episode, when Jesus unveils his teaching on marriage, he's like, one man, one woman, for life. That's your lot.
And they're like, oh, what? Oh, man.
Yeah. The red-blooded heterosexual Peter is like, I'm out. Count me out.
Yeah. You get to be a eunuch then. Oh, okay, maybe I'll get in. Maybe I'll go in on it. Like.
Which isn't. And so, which then says that actually what Jesus wants to do is to help us to discipline our sexual desires, because without disciplining our sexual desires, there can be no sexual liberation. And we were sold a bill of goods back in the 60s. Liberation is not had by forgetting my nature and by letting my unbridled lust have its way. That's not liberation. That's the beginning of a train wreck. And Douglas Murray has chronicled that train wreck really, really well. But I think one of the elements, as soon as you pick at the complementarity thing, then you start to discover what G.K. Chesterton said. It's mother, father, child. And from there, there's good news. I think you can build a society from there. But apart from that, the triangle is the strongest structure. And let's get back to that. So that's some of my reflections on Douglas Murray. But we spoke about far more in the interview. We talk about race and trans and feminism and does he think that the West would benefit from a revival of Christianity? Does he think he would benefit from a revival in his own Christianity? And you can see the answer that he gives there. So
it's definitely worth a watch. There's lots of good discussion in there.
Brilliant. And stay tuned this Friday for Catherine Burble-Singh, who was a powerhouse, and it's such a fun hour that you'll spend watching her this Friday. Last bit of news, we were going to talk about Amy Coney Barrett. Who is Amy Coney Barrett, Paul?
Yeah, so she's just been nominated over in the States. She'd been nominated for Supreme Court Justice, if I'm right. So it's in the wake of the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm not sure how many years she was on the Supreme Court, but it's been a long time.
93 or something like that. Yeah, 90s, I think. Or was it longer?
I thought you were saying that's how many years she'd been on it. I was thinking, like, crikey, like, how old was she? Like, just from birth. No, because of course when you're appointed, you're there for life. So and so she'd passed, and I think she'd said, hadn't she, something like she'd hoped that there would be no new appointment until a new president was put in to position. But of course, Trump has nominated Amy Coney Barrett, and obviously it's kind of kicked off in the Twitter sphere and in the press as people are just trying to discuss, is this woman appropriate? Because look at her life. She's a Catholic. She's Catholic. She's pro-life and all these kind of things. So I'll admit I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I have to admit though, I did see the picture of her with her family. And she's got, about 7 children? Seven children. And I thought to myself, well, this is going to be interesting because 2 of the children are clearly adopted. She's got 2 black children. And I just thought to myself, I would just wonder how the left is going to push this. Now, I'd just like to say, if you're on the left, it's not that I'm not on the left or anything like that, but I do. So this is one of the things that actually goes back to the QAnon thing slightly. Some people, we get accused at different times of either being too right wing or too left wing. The reality is, like, I look at the Tories and roll my eyes, and I look at every Guardian article and roll my eyes as well. So when I critique the left now, so anyway, I looked at and I thought, what's the left going to do with this? Because I just think how this doesn't tick the boxes. It doesn't follow the narrative, you know. But of course, amazingly, apparently, by adopting 2 black children, she's done the most racist thing you can do. And the mind boggles. So, I mean, there were quotes, tweets coming out from Ibram X. Kendi, who said, some white colonizers adopted black children. They civilized these savage children in the superior ways of white people while using them as props in their lifelong pictures of denial, while cutting the biological parents of these children out of the picture of humanity. I just thought it's amazing. That's the stage we're at, isn't it? Where a family gives a home to 2 children of color, you know, who are obviously from a different ethnic background to themselves, and of course the first accusation is, well, it must be because you're a white supremacist who's trying to, you know, civilize these savage children, like just
to steel man Ibram X. Kendi. I think what he was doing was responding to people who were saying she can't be a racist because she adopted some black children.
Right. Yeah.
So this is, I think, to put the best spin on it.
Some of my best children are black children. Is that?
Some of them. They're in the top 5 anyway. One of them's in the top 5.
Dear me.
So I think they were responding. So he was responding to some people who were saying, Barrett is clearly not racist because they've adopted transracially. And then, you know, I think you pick your moments, don't you? Because aside from anything else, the Barretts are a family. You know, they're not a pawn in a political game. And they're a beautiful family. And it looks from everything we can see, is that they're a happy, well-mannered, shining example of a family. And it looks like transracial adoption has worked out for them. It really does. Now, it is true, the history that Kendi, proffers here, that is true, that there have been terrible things done in the name of adoption. That is true. Of taking, in Australia in particular, there's a stolen generation of Aboriginal children that were stolen from their birth parents and raised white in order to erase their Aboriginal history, in order to in order to decimate the Aboriginal community. I mean, that is white colonization, massively.
Yeah. So I mean, so it seems like seemingly his defense is just I'm saying, this has happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which just seems so. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't really wash with me.
Yeah.
You know, if this was let's imagine it was a Democratic candidate who'd been nominated, and it was the same picture. Imagine she was a Democrat. He would not have got up and said that. He would not have tweeted that at all. It's entirely political. It's entirely just like we don't need to have this woman. She's awful because, you know. I mean, it's like if you have. I mean, if you had someone who said, "Hey, look, I drive a Volkswagen,"
right?
And you said, "Oh well,
right.
Nazis did the Volkswagen, didn't they?" Like, well, why are you even mentioning that? Like, you'd only be mentioning things like that if you were insinuating something about the fact that someone owns a Volkswagen. You know, I mean, that's a stupid example, but like, you know, but it's like, she's got black adopted children. Just saying. Yeah. Some people. Just saying. I'm not saying she is. I'm just saying. And you're like, come on, really?
Yeah. Again, I don't know why I'm doing this, but to leap to Ibram X. Kendi's defense again, it might be possible if you've got an historically formed bee in your bonnet about transracial adoption, and someone just mentions the issue of transracial adoption, and you say, well, you know it's problematic, don't you? You know it's #problematic, and let me give you some reasons why it is. Now, that is again to cast aspersions on a family that's just a beaming, lovely, you know, family, and so that's not on. But I think people do have heartfelt objections to interracial adoption. And it's interesting because I think in the UK, so speaking as an adoptive father, it's been very difficult in the UK to adopt any kind of child apart from a white child. So Emma and I put ourselves forwards for a number of different children who are black, and we're told that it was not appropriate because we couldn't affirm their cultural heritage. And we were told at the same time that black children are less likely to get adopted, which I think is outrageous. It's outrageous that black children...
Could those things possibly be linked?
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Unless you think there's a superabundance of adoptive parents out there, which there's not. So let's get on that, Christian family. Let's get adopting, right? But there's not a superabundance of adoptive, so they can pass over the Scriveners. That's okay. They can go to the next family, And so it does get to the point where, who knows what will happen to those children who we were not considered for. We wanted them. They did not want the social services the powers that be did not want us because of our race. That child is at a higher risk of staying in care for the rest of their life. Now, are we as a society saying that growing up with a true appreciation for the distinctiveness of your racial identity, that is a greater blessing in your life than being raised in a forever family? Are we really in a society saying that is such a value for me to know my racial identity is such a value that it's almost worth the risk of staying in care for the rest of my life?
Yeah, and also I'm sure that in some sense it's a false dichotomy, like that even though had you and Emma had a kind of black child, then there are many ways in which you could still help to affirm that child's. And now I'm not saying it's the same, but it's not like it's an either or. You can't do it at all. It just seems bananas to do that. And I mean, I think as well, like what I think is maybe in what this Ibram X. Kendi was saying, there's a sense as well in which I think is it not like slightly insulting to those children as well? Because isn't there not a sense to say, oh well, you're not really black, you're not properly black, are you? Because you were raised by white people, so right. you don't really understand what it is to be black. So like even though you're black, you're not black enough, And I just think like that's problematic as well down the road.
I think the argument would be, maybe that is the case, and it's the parents' fault for that, and it's just. I mentioned in the Douglas Murray interview that there are forces in culture of unity and there are forces in culture of particularity, and we need both. So it's very important that I am the particular person that I am, and I'm from this particular tribe and this tribe and this race, and I'm a man and I'm all this. But it's also really, really important that I'm a human, same as everybody else, and I'm equal to everybody else, and I'm welcome and all that kind of stuff. And the modern moment is a moment all of particularity. And therefore we see the re-racializing of everything. And what becomes really important is my racial identity and my pronouns and my sexual preferences and all the particularity of Glen, this complicated splendor that is me, is everything. And then we just lose the equality thing. And you see a photograph like the Barretts together, and what do you see? I hope what you see is what a happy family. I hope what you see is oneness. We are being trained to see particularity, to see difference. Oh, did you notice? 2 of them were darker skinned than the rest. And one of them has Down syndrome, right? But what do you see? Surely what you just see, the first, second, third, and fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh thing you should see is a loving, happy family.
Yeah.
And then let's deal with cultural heritage. It is an issue.
It's not to say those questions. Yeah, it's not to say those questions aren't. Yeah. There's not validity in those things, is it?
Yeah.
But you should look at that and go, well, look, here's white and black, able and disabled, whatever, differently abled, whatever the phrase is. Yeah. Apologies. Yeah. You should look at that and just go, that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
But our society, which it just seems deeply sick that is our first reaction, is to say, let's tear this apart, like.
Yeah, well.
But normally
at its strongest, they're saying, let's really zero in on the particular. And I'm sure at some point we'll get the unity, somehow. I'm sure. But let's really zero in on the difference between people and affirm the distinctness of the different racial identities. And you're like, well, at least paint me a picture. How does really racializing the human race get me to there? How does it get me to the unity point? Because at the moment, it just seems like everything's about the particularity. Everything's about difference. And, fascinatingly, so Ibram X. Kendi was retweeted by Richard Spencer, who really is a racist. The epithet racist gets thrown around, but here's a place it can really stick. Like a total white supremacist, an unapologetic white supremacist. The sort of person that Tom Holland worries about when he says, I really worry that we might get to the stage where someone is called a racist and they go, so what?
What of it?
Yeah. Yeah. Richard Spencer is that.
Sure.
That kind of person. So he retweets approvingly Ibram X. Kendi and says, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. And isn't it interesting that Ibram X. Kendi, who's written the textbook on how to be anti-racist, that's his big best-selling book, How to be Anti-Racist, is approvingly retweeted by a racist. And I think it's a little bit like the political spectrum, left and right, extreme left and extreme right are very close together.
Sure, the old horseshoe thing.
Horseshoe, yeah. There are aspects of some extreme anti-racist positions that are very close to racist positions, because it's about the re-racialization of everything, and let's get down to the particularity. And as Douglas Murray said on Friday night, that Robin DiAngelo, who's the author of White Fragility, an anti-racist theorist, she explicitly reverses Martin Luther King's saying that we should be judged by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. And she says, no, that's a bad thing. That's the racist thing. So what an age we live in when a white woman tells Martin Luther King he's the racist. But it is all about this particularity. And again, I think here's an argument for coming home to Jesus and coming home to a story in which, every tribe, nation, and people and tongue are there in the end. There is a particularity, I guess I'll be white forever. For better or for worse, I'll be white forever, right? So there's a tribe, nation, people, and tongue, but they are brought together around the Lamb in the great wedding feast.
Yeah.
And there's that unity, which is the end goal. Just a funny story about the
Glen's funny stories.
Do we have a jingle? Let's have a jingle. When we were adopting our son, he was born in Cardiff, right? But that is the only connection he has to Wales. And yet, because the system is so attuned to appreciating the cultural heritage of the child, like he's from a very mixed background. The only question we were asked at this massive panel interview, it's meant to be the scariest thing imaginable, and we sort of gave our story, and they said thank you very much. But the one question that was asked multiple times to us was, how are you going to affirm his Welsh heritage? He was 17 months old at the time. How are you going to affirm his Welsh heritage? And I like, in the providence of God, I spent my years 14 to 18 in Wales. Yeah. So I was able to say, well, I grew up the road, and I always support Wales and the Six Nations. And as soon as I said that, honestly,
please take this child.
That was the qualification. We were not asked anything else. There was no other hoop to jump through. A panel. Do you support Wales in the rugby or not? Yes. We'll buy him a little red rugby shirt. Hooray!
Yeah,
and we're supporting his Welsh identity. And okay, well then.
So he's got no. So it's just chance that he was born in Cardiff.
Right.
It's rest of his family are not Welsh in any way. So right. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the one. So, but I do agree that, okay, so if we had gotten a male, if we had gotten a black child, let's say, if we put ourselves forward and they said yes, I do agree. It would be very important to have conversations about where the child is from. In the same way, it's important for every adopted child to know where they're from. And there is definitely an added issue if you live in a predominantly white area. And there might be more questions brought up about a certain child when that child is already feeling a little bit like they stick out like a sore thumb because they're adopted already, and maybe you don't want to add that extra trauma to them. So with all those caveats, though, surely we can believe that the happy family we see in the Barretts is a goal that is far more worth pursuing than simply affirming the particular racial identity that we happen to have biologically. If we can't say that, we're really... It's the madness of crowds. Madness of crowds.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thanks guys for listening to today's episode. If you want to get more of this stuff, do subscribe to us on the podcast if that's where you're listening to us. If not, you might be watching on YouTube, then subscribe to us and click the bell and you'll get all our Reset stuff and our LIVEcast stuff. And Christmas is coming, our new 3D animated video. You won't want to miss out on that. And if you want to support us in any way, we survive on the generosity of people like you. So you can go to speaklife.org.uk/give. Plenty of ways to give there. Thank you so much if you're already supporting us in that way. Stay tuned on Friday. We'll have Catherine Burble sing as she is Britain's strictest head teacher, and we had a blast talking together. But until then, God bless and keep speaking life.
Take care.